Most people come to Westminster Hall and Burying Ground for one reason. They've heard that Edgar Allan Poe is buried here. They find his grave, take a picture, and leave. But if that's what you come here to see, you've missed one of the most fascinating cemeteries in America. Westminster Hall and Burying Ground has stood here since 1786, long before Edgar Allan Poe became one of the world's most famous writers. This cemetery was already filling with people who helped shape Baltimore, and in some cases, the United States itself. Walking through these gates feels different, not because it's haunted, not because it's creepy, because you're surrounded by history, real history, the kind you don't always find in textbooks. Look around and you'll find the Revolutionary War veterans, generals from the War of 1812, politicians, judges, businessmen, entire families all buried within just a few acres. Just a short walk away, another name stands out. John Stricker. The Stricker family became one of Baltimore's most influential families, and their name still lives on here inside Westminster. Then you come across something impossible to ignore, the Stricker Mausoleum. Massive, solid stone, built to last. Standing in front of it, it's hard not to wonder how many generations are resting behind these walls. One thing quickly becomes obvious. This isn't just a cemetery, it's a history book. Every headstone, every monument, every family plot represents a life that mattered to someone. Some graves are beautifully preserved. Others have almost disappeared beneath nearly 2.5 centuries of weather. Names faded, dates disappear, but the stories are still here. As we continued walking, the cemetery became even more interesting, because Westminster Hall isn't built beside the dead, it's built over them. Beneath the church, hidden below your feet, are dozens of brick burial vaults. Some people call them catacombs. Families who could afford it purchased these underground vaults, believing that resting beneath the church carries special meaning. Today, visitors walk directly above them, often without realizing hundreds of people are buried underneath. Standing down there, surrounded by old brick, low ceilings, and rows of sealed vaults, it's easy to see why this place captures people's imaginations. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, places like this have a way of making you lower your voice, slow your pace, and think about just how many lives ended here. Maybe that's why the cemetery feels different. It doesn't feel forgotten. It feels like it's waiting for someone to stop, look around, and ask questions. And no one leaves visitors with more questions than the man almost everyone comes here to see, Edgar Allan Poe. Most people know him as the father of horror, the man who wrote The Raven, The Telltale Heart, and The Fall of the Horse of Usher. But the truth is, his own life may have been darker and far more disturbing than anyone ever wrote. Most horror writers imagine darkness. Edgar Allan Poe lived it. His father abandoned the family before Edgar was even old enough to remember him. Then his mother died from tuberculosis before he turned 3 years old. Imagine your very first memories being shaped by loss. He was taken in by John and Frances Allen. That's where the name Edgar Allan Poe comes from. But he was never officially adopted, never truly part of the family, and throughout his life, money was almost always a problem. He wanted to make a living writing. Today, that doesn't sound unusual. In the early 1800s, it was nearly impossible. He bounced from city to city, working as an editor, publishing poems, writing short stories, and brutally criticizing other writers. Poe didn't just review books, he tore them apart. If he thought your writing was bad, he said it, publicly, sometimes mercifully. It earned him respect, it also earned him enemies. A lot of enemies. Then came the part of his life that still sparks arguments almost 200 years later. In 1836, Edgar Allan Poe married his cousin, Virginia Clemm. She was 13 years old, Poe was 27. That's not internet gossip, that's documented history. What happened inside that marriage is where history becomes far less clear. Some historians believe their marriage wasn't physical for several years. Others argue that simply not enough evidence to know, and others believe later writers tried to soften the story because of how uncomfortable it is today. The truth died with them. What we do know is that Virginia became the most important person in Poe's life. Then history repeated itself. Just like Poe's mother, Virginia developed tuberculosis. For years, he watched the disease slowly destroy the woman he loved. She died when she was only 24 years old. Many literary scholars believe that's why so many of Poe's stories revolve around beautiful young women dying. Not because he was obsessed with death, because death kept taking the people he loved. Then there was his drinking. This is another part of Poe's story that's surprisingly complicated. Some historians describe him as an alcoholic. Others argue he actually drank very little, but had an unusually low tolerance, meaning even a small amount of alcohol could leave him severely intoxicated. Who's right? Nobody knows for sure. That's the frustrating part about Edgar Allan Poe. The deeper you dig, the harder it becomes to separate fact from legend. And then there's Rufus Griswold. If you've ever had someone describe Poe as insane, immoral, hopelessly drunk, or completely out of control, there's a good chance those stories trace back to one man, Rufus Griswold. He wasn't Poe's friend, he was one of his biggest rivals. Just 2 days after Poe died, Griswold wrote an obituary attacking him. Then, he wrote Poe's biography. There's just one problem. Modern historians have found that Griswold exaggerated, twisted, and in some cases completely invented parts of Poe's life. Think about that. For decades, the world learned about Edgar Allan Poe through the writings of a man who may have hated him. How much of Poe's dark reputation was true? How much of it was revenge? No one can answer that with complete certainty. But if you think that's the strangest part of Edgar Allan's story, we haven't even gotten to his death. Eventually every path through Westminster Hall seems to lead here. Edgar Allan Poe's grave. Ironically, this isn't where he was buried when he died. Poe was originally laid to rest in a small, simple grave near the back of the cemetery. It wasn't until 26 years later, after his fame had grown, that Baltimore decided he deserved something more. His body was exhumed, moved, and reburied beneath the monument visitors see today. He's buried here with Virginia and his mother, Mary Clemm, the woman Poe affectionately called Muddy. By now, Poe has become famous for writing mysteries. What no one expected was that his own life would become the greatest one. In late September of 1849, Edgar Allan Poe disappeared. For several days, no one knew where he was. No one knew what had happened. Then, on October 3rd, he was found, wandering the streets of Baltimore. He was confused, barely conscious, unable to explain what had happened. The clothes he was wearing weren't his. Witnesses said he repeatedly called out one name, Reynolds. Who was Reynolds? No one knows. Why wasn't Poe wearing his clothes? No one knows. 6 days later, he was dead. His official cause of death, no one can say with certainty. Over the last century and a half, historians and doctors have proposed dozens of theories: alcohol poisoning, rabies, tuberculosis, diabetes, epilepsy, a brain tumor, heart disease, carbon monoxide poisoning, even murder. Every theory explains part of the story. None of them explain it all. But there's one theory that sounds like something Edgar Allan Poe himself would have written. It's called Cooping. During elections in the 1800s, political games would kidnap random people off the street. They'd beat them, drug them, force them into different clothes, sometimes even disguises, and make them vote over and over and over again for the same candidate. Then they'd dump them once they were no longer useful. Poe disappeared during an election. He was found near a polling place. He wasn't wearing his own clothes. Could he have been a victim of cooping? It's possible. Has anyone ever proved it? No. And that's exactly why people are still debating it today. As strange as Poe's life was, his story somehow became even stranger after he died. For decades, every January 19th before sunrise, an unknown visitor quietly walked into his cemetery. The visitor would leave behind 3 red roses and a bottle of cognac. No note, no explanation, no interviews. Then, just as quietly, he disappeared. People began calling him the Poe Toaster. His identity was never confirmed. Eventually, the visit stopped. Another mystery with no ending. Standing here today, it's easy to understand why Edgar Allan Poe continues to fascinate people. Not just because of the stories he wrote, but because of his own life became one. A childhood filled with loss, a controversial marriage, years of poverty, arguments with rivals, a reputation that may have been shaped by a man who wanted to destroy it, a disappearance, a death no one can explain, and mysteries that still haven't been solved. Maybe that's why people keep coming here, not just to visit a grave, but to stand in the place where history and mystery meet. If you had to choose, which theory do you believe? Did Edgar Allan Poe die from illness? Was he murdered? Was he the victim of cooping? Or do you think the truth disappeared with him back in 1849? Whatever the answer is, one thing is certain. Nearly 200 years later, Edgar Allan Poe is still doing exactly what he did best, making people wonder what's really true.
They built this church on top of this area.
So what's underneath there?
So underneath here is a graveyard. So there are like actual bodies, and this originally is where Edgar Allan Poe was originally buried. And they have moved him, I think, at least twice, maybe 3 times. But they also moved his mom and his wife. Fun facts. But that looks like it's open.
There's some pennies on here. Does anybody know why?
I don't know why. I actually am curious.
Let us know down in the comments below.
We already found Edgar Allan Poe.
Where is he?
Got him. Where we first came in.
Well, no one said anything.
You can't read?
You looked at it.
Hear me out. You're going to go underneath here, and you're going to take my phone, and you're going to take pictures of these two graves, and then I want you to see if there's anything on the other side of this stone.
Okay.
Here you go. Go be brave. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Don't die, and if you do, you can't sue.
We probably just walk around there.
We probably really
Is that a hand coming out of the ground?
Zombie!
He's like, I don't care. What about whiskey and bringing it to him on his birthday or something?
So there was a guy or a girl, I don't know, they don't know who did it, but every year on Edgar Allan Poe's birthday for like 60 or 70 years, don't quote me on the actual timing, but they came and brought whiskey and something else. Put it in the comments if you remember the something else.
And go. What all did you learn about Edgar Allan Poe last night?
A lot. It was a lot. So this is Edgar Allan Poe. This is his wife. On the other side is his mom. His body was exhumed. He was moved with his mom, and then they moved everybody up front. Then he married his wife, who was 13 while he was 27, and also they were first cousins. All of that is true. Look it up. Fun facts, or are they disturbing?